I'm opposed to the new proposed legislation in the United Kingdom that is supposed to protect the social media users, internet users, from harmful content. For the same reasons, I'm opposed to attempts to implement a benevolent dictatorship. Now, I think a benevolent dictatorship would actually be ideal. It would at least be preferable to a democracy, or any kind of representative democracy as we have now. But the problem is, there's no way to ensure that the dictatorship would remain benevolent. And therefore, the ideal alternative to a benevolent dictatorship then is some type of democracy. Now, with this new UK proposed internet regulations that requires the directors of websites to prevent harmful content or take action against harmful content on their platform, that implies that these regulators know what is benevolent and what is malevolent. And this malevolent content is what they're going to keep out. How? The problem is that the regulators are fallible human beings. They are not all-knowing. They're not all good. They make mistakes. And as a result, it's effectively impossible to create a balance between free speech and protecting the users, protecting the users of the internet. Because there's no way to ensure that these regulators, for one, we can't be sure they won't get corrupted by the existing powers that are currently in the government. And two, we cannot be sure that they will know what is and is not harmful with regards to content. Now, the first problem is with the potential for corruption. Now, there's always a possibility that the regulators will get corrupted by or coerced by the current powers that be in the government to declare anything that is critical of the current government, the current power, the powers that be, and declare any of that content be harmful. There's no way to be absolutely sure that's not going to happen. I think that's why the writers of the U.S. Constitution, in their First Amendment, made an unqualified guarantee of the freedom of speech and the freedom of the press and freedom of religion, because they realized, the writers of the Constitution realized there's no way to say, oh yeah, you can have free speech as long as it's not harmful speech. There's no way to say that and be sure that the government's going to be able to know what is and is not harmful, and no way to make sure that there's not the government's not going to say whoever's critical of them is the government could just say, hey, that's harmful speech, that's harmful press to whatever's critical of them. There's no way to prevent that from happening. There's no way to ensure that won't happen, I should say. And so they just say the best way to ensure that the current power structure is held to account is to have that freedom of speech and freedom of the press. Unqualified. That's the only way that can possibly be ensured is to maintain that freedom. Now with this new UK regulations coming in that say there's restricting that freedom of the speech, freedom of the press, because now that this regulators, if this law passes, they can just say, well, whatever is critical of what the powers that be want to put forward, especially with regard to, say, like military matters, if they're trying to push through some war. I'm thinking like especially in terms of thinking in the context of the recent coup attempt in Venezuela. Now, there's all sorts of lies put forward by the mainstream press and the governments that wanted to implement that coup. And the ones that have been calling out those lies have been alternative populist internet platforms, have been primarily the ones that have been spreading that, letting the people know what all those lies about that coup attempt. So it's clear that there's a lot of malevolent forces that are within the walls of power around the world, and so I think it's really naive to think that those same malevolent forces are not going to have some influence over these regulators who are supposed to decide what is and what is not malevolent speech, malevolent press. And so we could get to the point where these alternative, independent news sources who are calling out the powers that be, the warmongers, it's those independent sources, the anti-war sources, they may be labeled as peddling harmful content. I would not be least bit surprised, and could be shut down if these laws were to take effect and to spread around the world. And then I think that's probably the motivation. I suspect that may be the motivation behind this proposed legislation in the UK. And I think we're seeing other similar laws around the world that are being proposed, or I think in South Africa that may have already been implemented, that kind of law. So that it's really concerning. So yes, I think I think the same reason that we need a democracy, we need freedom of the press. They go hand in hand. Because otherwise, why not? If the government can decide what is benevolent speech, benevolent press, and what is harmful speech, if we can entrust them to do that, to decide that enough, why do we need? Then there's a question: why do we even need a democracy at all? Because they seem to have all the answers. Because there's once they're already in power and can decide what is and is not malevolent and benevolent speech. What is now basically the press is the internet. Then that would have massive influence over the electorate, and what they're deciding to vote for in any upcoming election. So the ability of the electorate to decide one way or the other in terms of who are they going to vote for could be extremely their knowledge that they're using to vote in any election could be extremely restricted to the point and swayed to the point where the elections would be effectively meaningless, given that the role of these new censorship regulators would have over the information that they would be receiving through what is now almost entirely the press, which is the internet. And so that the elections would be even more so just basically a show, but democratically meaningless. If these new laws were to go into effect around the world. That's just one point I wanted to make. Thanks for watching.